Today, we're going to be diving deep into a question that has plagued the internet for years. Where is Shelly Miscavige? Shelly Miscavige is the wife of David Miscavige, who is basically like the de facto leader of Scientology, and he's also Tom Cruise's BFF. If the upper echelons of Scientology are like politics, then he's the president and Shelly would be the first lady. There have been so many allegations against the Church of Scientology, and I'm sure that you're familiar with most of them. But today I wanted to tackle Shelly Miscavige specifically and try to uncover why she hasn't been seen since 2007. To understand more about Shelly Miscavige's disappearance, we first need to understand a little bit about the religion of Scientology. Strap yourselves in, we're going on a weird journey. Before we get into it, welcome back. It's spooky season and I'm putting out more videos. Long may it continue. If you're into deep dives and weird vibes, then subscribe and press the bell button too so you never miss a chance to stare at my ugly mug. I like to think that I do rational takes on irrational stories. That's like a strange new tagline that I just made up. Let me know what you think. Also, I originally covered this case on my podcast, which I host with my friend Martin, and it's a true crime podcast called Dial Femme for Murder, and you can listen to it pretty much anywhere where you listen to podcasts. So let's get into it. Weird Wednesday episode, whatever, and it's the disappearance of Shelly Miscavige. Scientology was founded in December 1953 by a man named Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, more commonly known as L. Ron.
Well, it's very interesting. You've just asked a question like, what are the contents of the Encyclopedia Britannica? Answer in one word.
He was a pulp fiction writer and he worked across various different genres. Literally every genre that you could think of, he's probably written for it, and he was super prolific. He had like over 250 published books. At some point on this channel, I want to make a video about L. Ron's life before Scientology because it's super complex and really interesting if you're anything like me and you're interested in like strange history, especially seeing as he founded arguably the largest modern day religion. He basically had a lot of stuff going on, and in 1949 he decided to work on what he was calling a book about psychology, and this would later become Dianetics, which was essentially a new form of therapy that he created after a process of like testing it out on groups of people. The general idea of Dianetics is that the human brain remembers every single thing that's ever really happened in your life, from the really good stuff to the really, really bad stuff and all of the ugly stuff too. The bad and the ugly experiences are what L. Ron called engrams, and you can think of these as kind of like mental bruises that happen in a state of partial or total unconsciousness, and that is what Scientologists call the reactive mind. We might not remember these like memories, engrams, whatever you want to call it, but they leave a permanent damage on our psyche.
Your mind uses this information to make decisions and solve problems relating to your survival. The better its decisions, the better you survive.
To get rid of these engrams, Hubbard theorized that a person could go through this process that he called auditing to remove them. And in auditing, an auditor will talk the patient through these bad experiences with the goal being to reach the state of clear. You've basically had all of those engrams removed and you're all good, you're clear now.
My auditors has a routing slip for clear that she showed me.
I almost screamed and I like wrapped my arms around her and I was like, yes, this is actually happening.
Yes, I had tested the state of clear. Finally, I myself am free.
You've got a clearer mind, you're able to function at an enhanced state. And according to L. Ron, that enhanced state is free from illnesses that he classes as psychosomatic, like the common cold. This channel is called Weird Reads for a reason, and we like to read books on this channel, so I do actually own L. Ron's Dianetics, and as you can see, like, he is a chunky boy. It's a chunker, this book, and one thing I love about it as well, like, this was new. I bought this secondhand, obviously. I didn't support the Church of Scientology when I bought this, but it was like new when I bought it and when it arrived off eBay, and when you open it up, it's got like all of these little leaflets in between the pages. So it's like, here, Ron's personal demonstration of Dianetics techniques, guide to the materials, you're on an adventure, here's the map. When you take the cover off this book, it's giving Bible. I don't know if I can explain it properly, right? But this texture of book, you always see it on something super religious, and it really is just like, I mean, this is Scientology's Bible, right? It's the work of L. Ron Hubbard. Everything that he writes is obviously the greatest, and it's so long. Like, look at it, it's crazy. So just to make sure that I'm on the right track, in Dianetics they describe engram as any moment of greater or lesser unconsciousness on the part of the analytical mind which permits the reactive mind to record the total content of that moment with all perceptics, and that will get stored in the engram bank, which is the storage place in the body where engrams with all their percepts are recorded and retained, and from which engrams acts upon the analytical mind and the body. I'm going to put this book down now, but bloody hell, what a chunker. So upon its release, Dianetics was super popular, and it came out on May 9th, 1950, and it kind of got this cult following despite being pseudo-scientific, and despite L. Ron's theory of Dianetics being rejected from the American Journal of Psychiatry and others, which could explain why he is so salty towards psychiatrists in general.
Scientology has another target. I'm invited to their exhibition, Psychiatry, an Industry of Death.
As popularity of the book begins to grow, all of these Dianetics groups begin to pop up everywhere, and people are willing to part with serious amounts of money to get auditor training and to be audited themselves. It's got this MLM vibe to it, like, you're going to get audited, then you become an auditor, then you can audit more people who then can become auditors, so then they can audit more people, and those people can become auditors, then everybody becomes an auditor. Everything's going remarkably well until people start to have their doubts on L. Ron's claims in the later part of 1950 and early 1951. Those who are following Dianetics aren't seeing these clear patients that L. Ron is saying exist. And there was this big controversy because he brought somebody out on stage and he was like, oh, she's reached the state of clear, she's got this higher IQ, she's got like greater like memory and stuff, and then she failed the assignment. Again, abbreviated history. I will put a link in the bio to where you can read more about this stuff. In this time, L. Ron's marriage to his then wife Sarah is crumbling. They were both having affairs, but he decided to accuse her and the man she was having an affair with of being communist, and he ended up reporting to the FBI, but they didn't believe him because, and this is their own words, he appeared mental. So he does what anyone would do, and he decides to kidnap both his wife Sarah and his 1-year-old daughter Alexis. He takes them to San Bernardino in California and tries to find somebody to declare Sarah medically insane. Then he ends up letting her go, but he keeps Alexis and takes her to Cuba, where he allegedly hired a mother and daughter to look after her, and they kept her locked in a cage. He then allegedly called Sarah and told her that he had murdered Alexis, chopped her up and thrown her in a river. To his credit though, he did call back and he said that he was making it up. L. Ron was just in a silly goofy mood, I guess. Sarah obviously files for divorce, claiming that he was committing bigamy, that he had beaten her, all manner of allegations against him. A bunch of financial things happen. L. Ron marries an 18-year-old and he establishes the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International, which is slightly different than the previous groups that were set up for Dianetics. This time, L. Ron is creating his own religion based on what he called the science of certainty, and the believers, they're Scientologists.
The subjective name means skill, which means knowing how to know in the fullest sense of the word, ology, which is study of. So it is actually study of knowingness. That is what the word itself means.
This was in May of 1952, and after the formation of Scientology, they began to grow quite quickly. In 1954, they're granted tax-exempt status in California, and then in 1956, they were granted tax exemption as a religious organization across the entirety of the US. At this point, L. Ron was making mad money off of his newfound religion, and he ended up buying a country house that is relatively close to where I live in the UK, in a place called St. Hill, and I've actually been there twice.
To the casual eye, this road leads into a stately mansion set in a forest glade. To the people of nearby East Grinstead, an old English town set in its ways, it's a source of irritation and trouble. And as far as the British government is concerned, St. Hill Manor is a haven for sinister cultists who prey on the unwary and bilk the gullible.
And the first time I went was the weirdest experience in the world. I remember driving in, we got out of the car and there were a lot of people just doing like gardening. And I'm not saying that gardening's weird, but the way that they were looking at me was really weird. And then we got a tour, a mini tour around this kind of makeshift castle that they've bought. It's like a modern day castle thing that Scientology have built there. And there's all the auditing rooms, all that kind of stuff. But they've also got a cafe there where I did buy a Diet Coke and we sat outside and they had like a car going round and round and round on a thing. And it was part of a competition where Scientologists could just win a new car. So I don't know. I don't know if they have that in every religion, but they definitely have that at Scientology. So we're in the 1960s now, and a lot of things happen in this decade, and I want to just quickly summarize a few of them. So in 1963, the FDA raided the church and they seized their e-meters and they classed them as illegal medical devices, and they forced the church to say that they are purely religious artifacts. In 1966, the church founds Narconon International, which they purport to be a treatment program for people with addiction. Also in 1966, L. Ron began to pump out his operating thetan levels. These are basically like the ranks within Scientology, and they're known as the bridge. And every level that you move past, you're moving further up the bridge.
Now we have here just the chart itself, which has been published, and it goes from the bottom up. It is read from the bottom up. Some people are more bottom than others.
So the way that you can think about the organizational structure within Scientology is, first of all, you're going to reach a state of clear within the church, and then you move on to the bridge and the OT levels. Now there are 8 levels in total, and each one takes a while to work through, and obviously you gotta pay. These things aren't cheap. Like, L. Ron is giving you the secrets of the universe, and for that you have to pay dearly. At each OT level, different information is revealed to you, and one of the most infamous OT levels is OT level 3 because it contains the infamous Xenu origin story.
They had elected a fellow by the name of Xenu to the supreme ruler, and they were about to unelect him. And he took the last moments he had in office to really goof the floof.
There's a lot that people have said about like the Xenu origin story, of like whether or not it's believed literally, like there was a galactic overlord guy that did a bunch of bad stuff many years ago. And in my opinion, it's one of like the least interesting things about Scientology. Like, it's one of those things in terms of like cult belief that you look out from the outside and you kind of go like, how could anyone ever believe that? But I find the more interesting thing with like these kind of stories, especially when it comes to religious cults, is like the coercive control that religious cults and cult leaders exert over the followers. That to me is far more interesting than just like wacky stories that are made up by a guy who wrote science fiction for a living. During the 60s, Scientology and the FDA are having this really big back and forth, and in 1969 the US Court of Appeals recognises Scientology as a religion, and in 1971 the FDA are ordered to return all of the e-meters that they took in their raid. In 1967, L. Ron founded the Sea Organization, which is basically the church's most dedicated members, and they had ships and land bases. Most notably, they had a ship called the Apollo, and on board the Apollo, L. Ron started a jazz band called the Apollo Stars, and he released an album called The Power of Source, and that is it's what's on my t-shirt, The Power of Source. I swear to God, it's really good. I'm sorry, all right? I've got no love lost for L. Ron Hubbard, but that jazz music was legit. The headquarters of the Sea Organization is in Gold Base, California, but they also have locations in Clearwater, Florida, which is the Scientology mecca. It's kind of flooded with Scientologists at this point. And Sea Org members can be based in any of Scientology's many locations. Like, these guys are mad into real estate. They own so much property, it is utterly ridiculous. Moving into the 1970s, L. Ron Hubbard is embroiled in a criminal conspiracy that Scientologists called Operation Snow White, where they were basically sending Scientologists to infiltrate government agencies, foreign embassies, private organizations anybody that talks shit about Scientology. They stole documents from the IRS. They did a bunch of wild stuff. And it's been labelled as one of the largest infiltrations of the US government in history, which is like, you gotta give it to him. Like, that's pretty mad.
Lawrence Wright said in his 2013 book, Going Clear, nothing in American history can compare with the scale of the domestic espionage of Operation Snow White.
Alongside this, in 1976, was another plan called Operation Freakout, where Scientologists planned to imprison and commit to a psychiatric hospital the journalist Paulette Cooper, who had written a book in 1971 called The Scandal of Scientology, which was deeply critical of L. Ron Hubbard. The FBI uncovered the plan, and thankfully Paulette was okay, but the church continued to harass her with lawsuits, as they do with everybody.
Scientology's founder L. Ron Hubbard ordered his followers to attack critics by any means possible. The fair game policy, written by Hubbard, decreed that enemies of Scientology may be deprived of property or injured by any means by any Scientologist without any discipline of the Scientologist, may be tricked, sued or lied to or destroyed.
All right, that's the history out of the way. Let's get on to Shelly Miscavige. So in the early 1970s, Michelle Shelley Barnett was on board the Apollo. And at just 12 years old, she became part of the Commodore's Messengers organization. Now, on board the Apollo, L. Ron allegedly liked to be called the Commodore. And he kind of strutted around doing this sort of like weird naval cosplay.
Oh, yes. The one man in the world who never believes he's mad is a madman.
Ron's a cult leader. Like, he's obviously a narcissist and he kind of wants these people to wait on him hand and foot. And the Commodore's Messengers organization was a group of hand-selected teenagers who would do that. They would literally like do everything for him. They would go get him drinks, they would relay his messages, and they were also being kind of primed and groomed by L. Ron Hubbard to be really influential people in the church. He kind of like had them under serious control. There were some men in the Commodore's Messengers organization. It wasn't just women. Like, there were a lot of women in it. I say women like children. There were some men, most notably a young David Miscavige. According to a 2014 Vanity Fair article that I read, Shelley's father Barney was a handyman and her mother Flo had some mental health issues, and both of them were devout Scientologists. And they essentially left Shelley and her sister Clarice to L. Ron Hubbard. And as people might know, when you join the C organization, you sign a billion-year contract, essentially committing yourself to the mission. And I think the best way for us to understand it as people that aren't Scientologists and don't believe in this stuff is that L. Ron Hubbard is perceived to be this kind of all-knowledgeable man, right? So, like, why wouldn't you want your child to be in the care of and, like, under the wing of the most important man in your perception? And that kind of goes into like the grooming thing as well and keeping people under coercive control. Like, it's easy for us to sit and think like, how would anybody ever give up their child to a crazed man on a boat? But it's this belief, and when the belief is constantly like reinforced over and over again, you're not giving up your child. You're literally putting your child in the care of the man that has all of the secrets of the universe. Like, L. Ron Hubbard knows what's up and he's going to teach your child and look after your child. Now, David Miscavige was also brought into the church by his parents, specifically Ron, who, interesting to note, has since defected from the church, and he speaks out against his son David really regularly.
What was it about the word Scientology that got you so interested?
I don't know, but it did. All I heard was Scientology, and I thought, what is that?
David and his family moved into St Hill in Sussex, where David was learning how to audit people. And at just 12 years old, he was conducting his own auditing sessions. He was a child prodigy of L. Ron Hubbard. He was the youngest professional auditor within Scientology, and he was in L. Ron's good graces. L. Ron loved him. Now, as the FBI started to investigate some of Scientology's more nefarious practices, L. Ron became increasingly paranoid, and he created this unit called All Clear. And All Clear would basically monitor the legal threats against L. Ron. David Miscavige was put in charge of All Clear, and along with this, he was also put in charge of Author Services Incorporated, which basically manages all of L. Ron's literary works, the many literary works. So the story goes that Shelley left the Apollo in the mid-1970s, and in 1978, her romance with David began at Gold Base in California. Shelley and David's romance blossomed, and Mike Rinder, former senior executive in Scientology and now a vocal critic, said that back in the early 80s when Shelly and David got married, Shelly wasn't subservient. She was essentially equal to David, and he recalls that she was quite feisty. She had her own opinion. She wasn't afraid to give her own opinion, and she wasn't really living under the thumb. Shelly and David become this kind of like young Scientology power couple, if you will. Like in this time, David's really starting to take control of Scientology, even while L. Ron is still alive. David set up the Religious Technology Center, which is a non-profit corporation that oversees the use of all trademarks, symbols and texts of Scientology. L. Ron's estranged son accuses David of embezzling and manipulating L. Ron, whose mental state is allegedly deteriorating. I would argue that L. Ron's mental state was deteriorating when he claimed to have chopped up his daughter and thrown her in the river. But anyway, interestingly, L. Ron denies this, and he said that David was a trusted associate and a good friend, and that case got dismissed. In 1986, L. Ron died, and David was the one that announced his death to Scientologists.
Thus, at 2000 hours Friday, the 24th of January, AD 36, L. Ron Hubbard discarded the body he had used in this lifetime for 74 years, 10 months, and 11 days. The body he had used to facilitate his existence in this messed universe had ceased to be useful, and in fact, had become an impediment to the work he now must do outside of its confines.
There is some controversy about who L. Ron wanted to take over when he was gone. Some former members claimed that L. Ron had written a memo that specified that Pat and Annie Broker, who were the couple that had the most contact with L. Ron after he'd kind of like retreated from the world and shut himself away in his final years, were the ones that should become the head of the church following his death. But David said that this memo was a forgery, and he became the head of the Church of Scientology.
We can make anyone into a flubless auditor in any academy in the world. And I repeat, flubless. Not pretty good, not better than he was before. No, I'm talking about better than you've ever seen. Flubless.
David Miscavige also holds the rank of Captain of the Sea Organization, which is like the highest ranking member. In real world terms, again, David is the prez. That's who he is. He's the president. And Shelly becomes the first lady. They are the most powerful and important members in the Church of Scientology. He also likes to call himself chairman of the board. Whenever I hear the words chairman of the board, I just think of that R&B band. So David creates the position of chairman of the board assistant for Shelly, and she becomes in charge of the staff that worked in the executive office. According to ex-followers, her role allegedly consisted of whatever David wanted it to be, basically. And David has always been accused by ex-members of the church of being incredibly aggressive, both verbally and physically. His own father has accused him of being physically and verbally aggressive.
And I saw him, I said, "Hey, Dave." And he turned to me and he looked at me like, "Who are you talking to?" No words were said, but that glance told me those days were over. I could never do that as a father to a son.
I mean, you even claimed in the HBO documentary that Miscavige physically assaulted you on numerous occasions, right?
Yeah, and it's yeah, I've said it over and over,
right.
And it absolutely happened. And there's been tons of people that have witnessed it, and I've witnessed it with tons of other people. And
he seems like a little guy. How could he? I mean, I don't think he can do that. How much damage could he do?
Well,
I mean, did you defend yourself?
No, because if you defend yourself, you're attacking him.
Obviously, these are just allegations. I can't prove anything, but they have been very highly publicised in the media. There are many, many reports. And if that many people are saying something, then maybe there's something to look into there. There's also reports from ex-members that Shelly and David's relationship never really seemed that intimate. They didn't kiss or hug, and there wasn't much affection between the two of them that was like public. Now, that might be a Scientology thing, because apparently there's a lot of people that don't like public displays of affection within within the Church of Scientology. There's no Megan Foxes and Machine Gun Kellys really knocking about in Scientology. They also allegedly slept in separate beds and they didn't share a bedroom, which isn't necessarily a sign of a bad marriage, but former members describe them as a bit of an odd couple. It's also important to note that as Scientology grew through the 90s and began kind of like amassing celebrities as members, there were several high-profile incidents involving the church, most notably the death of Lisa McPherson, who died of a pulmonary embolism while under the care of Scientologists in Clearwater. There were also a lot of people leaving and speaking out about Scientology. They were making allegations against David Miscavige, and they were claiming that Scientology had secret detention camps where those classed as suppressive persons were sent and essentially re-educated and forced to work in some really heinous conditions. Some of the defectors claimed that while they never saw David physically abuse Shelly, they did witness him shouting and admonishing her in public. And that's not really surprising for him because he seems to be doing that all the bloody time. Some people do allege that Shelly emulated David's demeanour, but most of them say that she was genuinely quite a nice person. A former Sea Org member named Gary Moorhead claimed in the Vanity Fair article that I read that Shelly would protect other church members from David's outburst. Other people claim that she stopped him from being more violent than he could have been and that she was the only person that ever really tried to intervene. However, all of the stress definitely took a toll on her. She's a really high profile member of the church. She's married to the leader, and some claim that she began to be in a very stressed and bad mood. Allegedly, she was heavily involved in the church's relationship with Tom Cruise, who undoubtedly is the most high profile member of the church. In the early 2000s, Tom Cruise began dating Penelope Cruz, and in this time she was allegedly converting to Scientology, with Shelly supervising her auditing and taking her through what the Scientologists call the Purification Rundown program. In the Purification Rundown, you are, according to Scientology, detoxing your body. So you come off any and all psychiatric medication that you might be on. You sit in a sauna for up to 5 hours a day, and some members have literally done this for over 4 weeks. You're also given a bunch of vitamins and like medications, including niacin, and the program costs over $5,000 as of right now.
It's a scam. Never give any money to Scientology.
You're basically supposed to sweat out all of the toxins in your body, and Scientologists claim that this can cure all sorts of ailments and again increase your IQ.
Instead of being just a passenger, now I'm driving the train and I'm just going full blast towards eternity.
The relationship between Tom and Penelope didn't last, sadly, and this is where the alleged quest to get Tom Cruise a girlfriend begins, and allegedly Shelly was really involved in this process. According to some allegations, around 100 actresses were interviewed for the position of Tom Cruise's girlfriend, but they weren't told why they were being interviewed. Apparently, some of them thought that they were being interviewed for a role in Mission Impossible. And if you want to know where all these allegations are coming from, it's all in the book Going Clear. Now, again, allegedly the search ended and Tom Cruise met Katie Holmes naturally.
I'm in love. We've never seen you behave this way before. I know. Have you ever felt this way before?
And they got married and they had their child Suri. And important to note as well, just to clarify, Tom Cruise does deny all of these allegations, but there are quite a few of them. In late 2006, Shelly gets given an impossible task by David to reshuffle the Sea Organisation leadership, essentially. And apparently she worked on this night and day, and she would present her plans to David and he would basically just reject them outright. And what I would say to David is, if you're that fussy and that picky and you want the job done a certain way, then just do it yourself. It's almost as if a task like that would be given so that the person doing the task would like strive to succeed, and the person giving the task could just kind of like kick them and just knock them down over and over again. According to the Vanity Fair article, David and Shelly weren't spending time with each other. He was in LA and she was at Gold Base, and Shelly started to make some decisions in regards to the Sea Organisation. And she basically wrote up new titles and duties for people and she informed them of it. She was just kind of like doing her job. They'd also been talking about renovating their living quarters for a while, but nothing had been going on. So she decided to actually get the ball rolling, and she boxed up some of David's belongings and moved them like outside of the living quarters. Now, David eventually comes back from LA, and people allege that Shelly became incredibly sheepish and withdrawn. Mike Rinder says that Shelly cornered him and asked him in a very covert way whether David was wearing his platinum wedding ring or his gold ring. And he says it was almost like she didn't want to ask if he was still wearing his wedding ring. A week later, she's stripped of her duties and she vanishes. Her clothing designer is told that they don't need to do Shelly's clothes anymore because she's gone on a special project, and nobody hears from her. She's just kind of gone. In 2006, Tom Cruise married Katie Holmes, and it was a huge event for Scientology. Everyone's there. It's the who's who, the creme de la creme of Scientology, except for Shelly Miscavige. Now, obviously, a lot of people notice that she's not there, but Leah Remini is the only one that actually questions publicly where she is, and it ultimately led to Leah leaving Scientology.
I had gone to the church, and I asked the spokesperson at the time, Tom Davis.
Right here, right now, I'm angry, real angry.
Where is Shelly? I think it's weird that she's not here. And he said, you don't have the effing rank to be asking about the leader's wife.
It's as if you are terrified of anyone criticising your organisation. It's as if there's something that you've got to hide.
I am not terrified of anything, and you know what? I have absolutely nothing to hide whatsoever.
Leah says that she was punished for asking where Shelly was, and that she was asking because Shelly was her friend and she was genuinely concerned about where she was. It was unusual for Shelly not to be there. This is like the big Scientology event. It's Tom Cruise's wedding. She's the first lady of Scientology. She should be there. Leah writes Shelly letters and she doesn't get a response, and this really triggers Leah's questioning of Scientology. And Leah said that she started to read the accounts of defectors, and she says that this is the moment where she was decided that she no longer wanted to be part of the organisation. She's also kind of being labelled with this thing of being a suppressive person just for asking where her friend was.
And she asked Tommy Davis, and that's when he famously said, you don't have the fucking rank to ask. And that then resulted in her being ordered to come to Clearwater and scrub toilets and undergo...
Shit, that's what she was doing.
Yeah, undergo expensive sec checking, which is interrogation on the Scientology e-meter that she paid $300,000 for, and then she never got answers, and nobody would ever answer her, and that just sort of, that's not a good thing to do with Leah.
If you haven't seen Leah Remini's documentary, Scientology and the Aftermath, I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. Not just for her, she's amazing, and I love just how ballsy she is. She just says it how she sees it. But also for Mike Rinder, I'm a big fan of Mike Rinder. On June 25th, 2007, which is almost 2 years after Shelly disappeared from Gold Base, her father died. She actually was allowed to attend the funeral, but with a Scientology handler who was allegedly Marty Rathbun's ex-wife, Anne, and Marty was also a very well-known Scientology defector. It's a little bit controversial now. At her father's funeral, she was approached by a Scientologist who had been declared a suppressive person, or was in the process of being declared a suppressive person, and they asked her for help. And Shelly allegedly said, I fucked up and I'm not going to be able to help you. That was the last time that anybody saw Shelly Miscavige in public. And in 2013, Leah Remini filed a missing persons report with the LAPD, and it got Shelly's disappearance a lot of media coverage.
I filed a police report. Then I called the detective to follow up on, and then by the way, I had given a letter. I had written a letter.
So the LAPD apparently investigate, and they say that they met with Shelly and that she's not missing. But this is heavily disputed by a lot of people that claim that there is no evidence that the LAPD actually saw Shelly and spoke to her.
So I gave him a note that said, Shelly, I haven't heard from you. I'm worried about you. Here's my number. Leave with this man. Call me right now. What's going on in there is horrible, and you know it. I will take care of you, whatever I said. Leave with this man now. Okay, never gave her the note. as far as I know. And then when I called to say, okay, did you find her? They said, that's classified.
Who said that's classified?
The detective.
There are so many allegations of like what happened to Shelly, where is she, and where is she being kept. The most likely location of Shelly Miscavige is at a 500-acre site known as the Church of Spiritual Technology, also known as Twin Peaks or Rim Forest. CST, known as Church of Spiritual Technology, was created to protect the writings of L. Ron Hubbard for future generations. They've basically preserved everything that he's written. It is totally indestructible. It will even survive nuclear war. Scientologists have spent millions of dollars on state-of-the-art technology to basically protect everything that came out of L. Ron's mouth or his brain that he put on paper, or whatever you want to call it. Now, some people do point out that if Shelly is there, it's a heavily guarded area, and if she isn't doing well and she wants to leave, she's essentially trapped. This is the place where the most important Scientology texts are kept, and it's not a place that Scientologists take lightly.
Yes, there's barbed wire fences and cameras and lights and motion sensors, etc., around that property, just like there is at Gold. And that is a way of deterring people from trying to jump the fence or escape. But that's not what really keeps. I mean, if you want to get out, you can.
In 2016, Leah filed an official records request with the LAPD for documentation regarding their visit to Shelly. The LAPD basically refused to give information.
Here's what's even sicker. The detective that was supposedly in charge of this case is you can Google this, okay? He is pictured at speaking at the Celebrity Center on human trafficking.
Wow.
Yes. Okay, so he tells me it's classified. I go, are you sick? I mean, are you sick? Is there something, are you on your way to retirement? Like, I don't get this whole, your response to me. He's like, okay, as far as I know, this is what I can tell you, she's fine. Did you see her? I said, did you see her with your own eyes? That's what I'm asking you. Did a representative see her? I cannot tell you that.
And Shelly's family that aren't in Scientology have tried to get wellness checks for her, but the local sheriff's department required evidence that Shelly was actually at CST headquarters, but they can't get that evidence because the police won't release it. Valerie Haney, who was at Gold Base and was really good friends with Shelly, claims that the last time she saw her, she was walking to a car in late summer 2005 with her driver and she was crying, but that she moved her face so as not to allow Valerie to see her crying. Valerie says that you're not allowed to inquire about where Shelly is. You can't question or ask questions because otherwise you'll be investigated. She also said that if you wanted to leave Gold Base, you would be physically restrained and you won't be able to leave. Valerie actually managed to leave Scientology by hiding in the boot of an actor's car.
And he pops the trunk and I get out. I'm like, hi, yeah, sorry. And he's just like white and, oh my God, you were in my trunk this whole time. Are you okay?
And she explains in the Leah Remini show all about coercive control and how the church allegedly manipulates its members into staying. You know, they say such things as, if you leave this church, if you go out into the outside world, you're going to die of cancer. It's that level of manipulation and control that keeps people staying. The church obviously calls her a liar. They say that she's just after money and that she could have left at any point, which is totally contrary to both the physical and mental prison of belief that Valerie claims that she was trapped in. Nobody has seen Shelly Miscavige since 2007. Many speculate as to whether she is still alive, but the odds seem pointed at her still being alive and being at the CST headquarters in California. The chances are that the police did meet with her, and many allege that Shelly is under coercive control from those around her. She's now 60 years old. She's potentially been at the CST headquarters for over 15 years and nobody has heard from her. There was a potential sighting of her in 2016 in the town close to CST headquarters. The witness described her as a thin, smaller woman escorted by two men and said that she looked disheveled. But if you go and look at the channel Growing Up in Scientology, they basically dispute that by saying there is no way that Scientology would let Shelly Miscavige out, even with handlers, if she was disheveled and not in a very good state. They just wouldn't let her out. But you would think that Scientology might be interested in disproving the allegations that Shelly is being held against her will, or that something nefarious has happened to her, but there's nothing. Radio silence. Almost as if Shelly Miscavige never existed. Like she's not the wife of the most important man in Scientology. And you think maybe David would have something to say about the whereabouts of his wife, but again, nothing. But the issue with religious groups like Scientology is that when you're in it from childhood, your perception of the world is quite literally shaped by belief. And in this case, belief in Scientology. Shelly was essentially given up by her parents, and she was raised by L. Ron Hubbard. So many of these children that are part of the Sea Organisation come to view L. Ron as their father. He's the parental figure in their lives. He literally at one point wanted to like go and adopt young children so that he could like be the parental figure and he could like raise them in Scientology. As they point out in the Leah Remini show, many Scientologists believe that L. Ron is actually going to return at some point. Like he's going to come back to life, and they're actually building houses for his return. It's a total indoctrination into this belief system.
But on this compound, we're told, is a house which is built for L. Ron Hubbard's return.
There are a few unusual features at this compound. This building is set into the side of a mountain which leads to an underground vault. We're also told that there is a house specifically built for L. Ron Hubbard's return. Even though he died 27 years ago, he apparently is coming back.
Leaving Scientology isn't simple or easy, as we all know, and it's easy for us to sit here and speculate about where Shelly is. Oh my God, what happened to her? But none of us really truly know. Is Shelly Miscavige a prisoner in either her mind, her body, or both?
So she was a long-term, very loyal Hubbard acolyte.
Okay.
And I assume remains that way to this day.
Well, I think we know that she's a prisoner in her own mind. I think that is obvious, but I don't think that we'll ever have the answer to whether or not she is like physically imprisoned. And that's the thing about this case. It's like it is the prison of belief. Essentially, like even if she is totally fine, like fine in inverted commas, she's not fine because she is under coercive control and has been since she was a child. I do find it alarming though how a woman can just go missing and not really much is said about it. You know, she's the first lady of Scientology and she hasn't been seen in over 15 years. That is just mind-boggling to me. It's crazy. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that you learned a little bit about Shelly Miscavige and Scientology. Fingers crossed, I will see you next week where we will be diving into a case, again, my favourite topic, satanic panic hysteria, this time in North London in the 1970s with the case of the Highgate vampire. Also, let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think about Scientology? What do you think about the disappearance of Shelly Miscavige? I would love to hear your thoughts, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!